He is the author of 2 books, Focus on the Good Stuff and Be Yourself, Everyone Else is Already Taken, which has been translated into 14 different languages. In the forthcoming book, Nothing Changes Until You Do, which comes out next May. He's an expert in teamwork, leadership, and emotional intelligence who delivers keynotes at events for some of the top corporations, associations, and government agencies in this country. His diverse and impressive clients include Google, Wells Fargo, Adobe, Gap, Twitter, Charles Schwab, eBay, the U.S. Department of Labor, Facebook, the San Francisco Giants, and many others. Mike has also spoken at a few IFMA events as well over the years, specifically in the San Francisco Bay Area where he does live. He and his work have been featured in Forbes and the Wall Street Journal, as well as the Oprah Radio Network and ABC News. For the past 6 years, Mike has been a regular contributor to the Huffington Post. We're thrilled to have you on our first corporate facilities webinar, First Wednesday of 2014. Mike, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Joshua. I appreciate you having me. So we're going to talk about authenticity, and I thought I'd start with a question. How many of you consider yourselves liars? I know that's a little bit harsh, but how many of you ever find in the course of your work and relationships and communication you ever massage the truth a little bit? You know, most of us do that, and as we dive into this conversation on authenticity, we're going to spend some time first looking at what makes it difficult or challenging to be authentic, and I thought I'd start by sharing kind of a funny story related to my book, Be Yourself, Everyone Else is Already Taken, which is a lot of what I'm speaking about here. You know, the book came out a few years back, and it came out on a Monday, and we had a big event at a hotel to sort of launch the book, and we did some things online to let people know the book was coming out, and I did some media stuff that first week, and it was all very exciting, but I hadn't actually been in a bookstore. So the end of the week, I finally was able to make it down to the local Barnes & Noble near where we live. We live in the San Francisco Bay Area, and there's a big Barnes & Noble store not that far from where we live. So I go to the Barnes & Noble, and I was excited to go in Barnes & Noble because I had been told by my publisher that not only was Barnes & Noble supposed to carry the book, but they were going to be featuring it up front for the first month or so that it was out. So I wanted to go in there and make sure they had the book, and they were really featuring it. And I walked in, and at first I got a little stressed out because I didn't see it. And I wasn't sure, and I'm like, where is it? And I was going to go over to the counter and ask, excuse me, do you have my book? And then out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. It was in the middle of the store. They had a big circular display where they had a bunch of new released books, and mine just happened to be on the back side of it, which is why I couldn't see it when I walked in the door. So I go over there, and I'm all excited, and I'm standing there, admiring my own book, right? I mean, of course I'd seen it, and I had a bunch of them in my office, and we'd done these events, but it was the first time I'd actually seen this book in a bookstore, so I was having kind of a proud moment. And then I started to have this conversation in my head. Should I buy one? That's what I'm thinking right now. I know that sounds pretty narcissistic and self-absorbed, and it actually is, but what I had learned when my first book, Focus on the Good Stuff, came out was from some of my mentors in the publishing world was that essentially books are on consignment when they're in the bookstores, meaning if nobody buys them, they send them back to the publisher. So some of my mentors had said, Mike, it's okay, even if you feel a little funny about it, when the book first comes out, pick up a few copies when you're in the store, sort of help the cause move them through, and it's a good thing to do. So I had done that a few times in my first book, but this was now my second book, and I was thinking, oh gosh, this is kind of obnoxious. So anyway, I debate for a while in my head, and then I decide, what the heck with it, I'm going to buy one. It just came out, I'm excited. So I grab the copy, I get in line, and I decide to myself when I get to the front, I'm going to, tell the woman or whoever, behind the counter, hey, it just came out, it's my book, I'm kind of excited about it, because I was, feeling a little self-conscious about it. As I'm getting closer to the front, I'm feeling more self-conscious, and then by the time I get up to the front, I'm now feeling quite nervous. I put the book down on the counter, and before I can say anything, the woman behind the counter says to me, oh, we've been selling a lot of these. I say, really? I'm kind of excited. And then before I could even say anything to that, she asked me a question that totally threw me off. She said, did you see this guy on TV or something? And her question kind of threw me for a loop, and I felt a little funny, and I'm not sure exactly why, but here's what I said. No, he's a local author. I just want to support him. Like, that's what came out of my mouth, right? I don't know if this has ever happened to you, but literally as it was coming out of my mouth, I'm like, what is that? And I say this, I'm shocked. I can't believe what I just said. I'm standing there. I must be sort of mortified. I have a funny look on my face because she's looking at me kind of funny. I mean, she has no idea it's my book. but I can't even really recover. All I can do is just reach into my wallet, to pull out my credit card with my name on it to pay for the book. And I paid for it really fast, and I run out of the store, and I'm literally standing in front of the Barnes & Noble staring at my book, thinking to myself, I wrote a book on authenticity, and I just lied to that woman. So, look, that's how it happens. It's usually not quite that egregious, right? And it's not like you and I wake up in the morning and say, I'm going to lie to people. I'm going to deceive them. I'm going to be phony. I'm going to, manipulate. No, but what happens in the course of our life, and particularly in the course of our work and trying to get things done and trying to manage relationships and trying to do all the different things we got to do in life and in the work that we do, we massage the truth. And even though it's usually not malicious, over time what it does is it starts to erode not only our credibility but our relationships. It makes it difficult for us to connect with people, to trust them, for them to trust us, for us to work through conflicts, for us to partner and team together. And if you look at the relationships that you have in your life, particularly the ones at work, and especially the ones that are most challenging and most difficult, one of the common denominators in those relationships is often a lack of authenticity. So we're going to take a look in this webinar at a few things. We're first going to talk about what authenticity actually is. And then we're going to take a look at both why it's important, but more specifically go deeper than that, and what makes it difficult or challenging to be authentic. Because that's a really important piece of the journey, if you will. The access to more authenticity is actually telling the truth about when and where and why we're not authentic. And I spend the whole first third of my book talking about that because it's so important. Then we're going to get into the 5 principles of authenticity that I teach in Be Yourself. Everyone else has already taken it in my speeches and seminars about this. And then we'll have some time for Q&A at the end and talk a little bit about how you put this into action. But I want to say, and Joshua mentioned it, feel free, and Joshua, you feel free to interrupt me as I go if people have questions. If you have questions or thoughts or ideas or anything you want to share as we go, don't feel like you have to wait until the end. Now, I know some of you, we got a nice group that's listening here live. Some of you obviously are listening to this recording after the fact, so you can't actually ask questions. But one other thing I'm going to say, whether you're listening live to the webinar or you're listening to it after the fact, what I'd really love for you to be able to do, and I'm sure you're busy and you're sitting in front of your computer and there's lots of different, demands on your attention at the moment, but if you have a piece of paper or a pen and something to write with or a journal where you can take notes, but there may be a time or two I'm going to have you stop and both think about something and even jot something down, just so this is less theoretical and more practical, if you will, in your own life. All right? So and my 2 promises for the webinar is that we have some fun, and also more importantly that it's actually applicable and practical to your life so you can take some of the stuff from this and use it right away. Okay, so let's see if we can dive on in here, and let's see. Okay, so a couple questions that are up here on the first slide is, what does authenticity mean to you? In other words, what's your definition of it? So just take a moment right now. If you want to jot it down, you can. But just think to yourself, when you hear the word authentic, what do you think of? What does that mean? What's your own personal definition of it? I ask this question a lot when I'm speaking around the country to different groups, and I hear different things like honesty, transparency. Authenticity means genuine. It means, being true to ourselves. Lots of different definitions, and we all kind of understand what it means. And your definition, maybe a little different than my definition, and we all have our own unique take on it. But it's not so much about defining the word as it is really understanding what authenticity really means. And one of the things that I find is that it manifests itself, so to speak, differently with different people based on our personality, based on our background, based on a variety of things. I was giving a speech a few years ago at a big event. I gave this keynote speech, and I got done speaking, and I was, after my talk, I was signing some books, and people were coming to talk to me and ask questions, and a woman came up to my table, and she made a beeline right over to it, and she got right in my face, and she said, I'm authentic all the time. And I was like, okay. She was like upset, right? I was like, okay, well, what's the problem? And she said, well, I've lost some jobs because of that. And, now I didn't know this woman, right? But in that moment, I was getting a very strong sense of her, if you can imagine, right? And I looked her in the eye and I asked her a question. I said, now tell me the truth. Is it authentic or obnoxious? And she was like, all offended, and And I said, listen, I'm sorry, I'm not trying to offend you. In fact, I'm not even trying to judge you. I'm just curious. What do you think? And she said, well, maybe a little bit of both. And I said, all right, I appreciate the honesty. And I said, but look, I don't know for sure. This was a couple years back, so I told her, I've been doing this for over a decade, not just speaking at events like this, but working with lots of different organizations and teams and leaders and different industries. And I said, look, in all my experience, my assumption is it was the obnoxious that got you fired, not the authentic. I said, because in all these years, I've never had anyone say to me, you know what, Mike, we fired her because she was way too real. So authenticity is about realness. It's not necessarily about sharing every single opinion that we have all the time because I'm just being authentic. That actually at times can be really disruptive. It can be hurtful, painful, disrespectful. So authenticity is a key element of our emotional intelligence. And the way that I always like to describe it is think of it on a continuum. On the far side of the continuum, let's say on the far left side of the continuum, we'll call inauthentic, phony. We all know what that looks like. We know what that feels like. We know it not just with other people. It's easy to point out, right? You guys partner with people within your organizations, leaders, not only within your facilities team, but within the company, and you can easily point out like, oh boy, that person, he or she, is not a very authentic leader. We do it with politicians, right? We do it with famous people, celebrities. We all get really frustrated with the lack of authenticity sometimes we see in the public domain. So it's easy to spot over there. And you can even tell in interpersonal conversations when you sense someone's not really being straight or real with you, right? But the more important place on a personal level for us to take a look at that inauthentic aspect of things is actually within ourselves. When and why and how are we inauthentic? Now again, usually we have justifiable reasons, and mostly it's not malicious. Again, we're not trying to deceive people. And it doesn't usually look like we actually lie about stuff, although sometimes we do. It's more withholding the truth or not really saying. Sometimes for those of you who are leaders, it may be not really giving someone the feedback. Or even if you're not a leader, it might be with your own boss, with your own manager. Or again, as you work in your role in facilities, dealing with some of the other partners that you support, the internal clients you have within your organizations. It's like playing politics, right? So anyway, there's a lot of different reasons, but we move along. We realize we can't hang out in that inauthentic place for too long. It doesn't feel good for us. It's also not sustainable for really building trust and healthy relationships. So you move along the continuum to the midway point is what I'll call honest. Now, honest is much better than authentic than not honest, right? I mean, honesty is the best policy, right? We've all been taught that. Our mothers, our fathers, our teachers, coaches, whoever taught us, be honest, tell the truth. Right? Don't lie. You'll get caught in the lie. My mom used to teach me that. I remember as a kid, and she was absolutely right. I'd end up lying, and then I'd get in trouble, and then it was less about what I did. It was more about the lie, all of that. But however, how many of you have ever told the truth or been honest about something, and it's created a problem? Right? Something bad happened. You got some, I don't know, you gave some feedback, and it upset someone, or you said what you really thought, and it was like, oop, that was not the politically correct answer, or that was not what you were supposed to say, or whatever. And then, oh, we realized, okay, not that honest. I got to be a little less honest. So this is where we start justifying, massaging the truth. But still here, we're only on the sort of left side of the continuum. The midway point is honest. Now, honesty is important, but it's not the ultimate goal. But then what happens is we hang out between inauthentic or phony and honest, trying to be mostly honest, but politically correct honest, right? Not too upsetting or offensive honest, honest in a way that gets me what I want, honest in a way that has people that like me, approve of me, think I'm good, successful, whatever, right? But there's no real freedom there, if you will. There's no real power there for us. Where the real freedom and power lies is on the other side of honesty. So we keep moving along the continuum all the way down to the far right side. That's where authenticity lies, over there. And in order to get to authentic, to real authenticity, there's something we have to remove from our honesty and something we have to add to it. What we have to remove from honesty is self-righteousness. Now this one is tough. This is a real look. Well, here's what emotional intelligence is. Emotional intelligence is self-awareness and self-management, so knowing what's going on for me, and relational awareness and relationship management. This takes an enormous level of emotional intelligence to be able to do, and it's an ongoing process. Can I be aware of my own self-righteousness? What does that mean exactly? Like for me, I come from a family where we speak our opinions like they're facts. You know what I mean? Like I can literally remember as a child my mother saying things like, "That's a bad movie. Anybody who likes it is an idiot." You know, and we get really attached to our opinion and passionate about our opinions. And how many of you, like me, have lots of opinions? Probably have a lot, like I do. How many of you, like me, think your opinions are right? Yeah, that's the problem. When we think our opinions are right, they're not. I'm not saying your opinions aren't important. I'm not saying they're not valid. I'm not saying they're not even well-informed, and like you have absolute every right in the world to have an opinion on anything, from something at work to something at home to something political to something personal to you name it. And some of our opinions we hold very, very sacred depending on what they are. However, the problem isn't with the opinion. The problem is the righteousness of the opinion. I mean, look, again, just look at our world right now. Look at the culture in which we live. We're arguing all the time about opinions, thinking that they're facts. They're not. And this plays out in our daily lives all the time at work. Look, righteousness is one of the most damaging energies that we carry as human beings. It's damaging to relationships, to trust, to teamwork, to collaboration. Again, because if I'm righteous and you don't agree with me, if I'm right and you don't agree with me, what does that make you? Wrong, at least in my opinion. And then on the other side of it, you're going to hold the opposite opinion of me. So now we're arguing for who's right, who's wrong. Now look, sometimes we've got to debate and discuss and we have different opinions. That's totally fine. That's healthy. That's natural. Righteousness is the problem. Martin Luther King said, "We have no morally persuasive power with those who can feel our underlying contempt for them." So what we want to do is be mindful and aware of our own righteousness. If we remove righteousness from honesty, then we can express our honesty in a way that other people can actually hear, even if they don't agree with us. But that's only the first piece. We've got to remove righteousness. The thing we have to add to it, so we remove righteousness from honesty, we add vulnerability. That gets us to authentic. So we're honest, yes, but we're honest without righteousness, meaning there's a level of empathy, awareness, a level of humility, and we're vulnerable. Ooh, that one's kind of tricky. What do you mean vulnerable? Most of us have been taught vulnerability is bad, vulnerability is weak, vulnerability, don't make yourself vulnerable. You will get hurt, you will get taken advantage of, you will get messed with, all these things that we've learned or been taught or internalized about vulnerability. Now look, vulnerability is not easy. It's not usually even comfortable. But vulnerability is where we learn, where we grow, where we connect. Here's what we have recently found with some fascinating research in the world of emotional intelligence and social psychology, is that vulnerability is the key driver in human connection. It's what's necessary for us to connect with other human beings is vulnerability. On a personal level, it's also a key determining factor in our level of courage. You have as much courage as you're willing to be vulnerable. Meaning the more willing we are to be vulnerable, the more courage we have. And why is courage important? Courage is a driver for risk-taking. Courage is a driver for boldness. Courage is a driver for actually creative solutions. So without any courage, emotional courage, leadership courage, personal courage, very difficult for us to make change, for us to grow personally, for us to grow collectively. So does that make sense? I know that's kind of a long explanation, but think of the continuum. Phony, midway point honest. We want to move to honesty, of course, but honesty without righteousness and with vulnerability, that gets us to authentic. And from the authentic place, we have real power. We can have real influence. We have a lot more freedom. It doesn't mean we're always going to be right. It doesn't mean we're not going to get our feelings hurt. It doesn't mean we're not going to ever get taken advantage of. I mean, you can't control those things in life. Look, have you ever noticed the more you try to control someone not upsetting you, hurting your feelings, taking advantage, whatever, fill in the blank, whatever negative thing you don't want to happen with other people, you can't guarantee it. It's like saying, I'm going to fall in love with someone, but they're not allowed to ever hurt my feelings or break my heart. Well, you don't get that guarantee, right? It's like years ago, a mentor of mine said to me, Mike, you're living your life as though you're trying to survive it. He said, Mike, you got to remember, nobody ever has. And that's something for us to keep in mind as it relates to authenticity. So that's what it is. Now, why is it important? Right? So think about the work you do. Think about the relationships you have. Why is authenticity important? Now look, each and every one of you, I mean, even though I've spoken at some IFMA events, I've spoken at some facilities groups within organizations, I don't know exactly what it's like to be you, to do your job. Some of you are here in the U.S., maybe some of you are in Canada, maybe some of you are outside of the U.S., some of you work for really big companies, some maybe smaller companies, right? You work in different industries. So the reason why authenticity is important specifically to your work and your relationships may vary a little bit, but in general, as I was saying before, authenticity is fundamental, vulnerability specifically to human connection. And when I go into organizations, particularly when there's a problem, when there's an issue, when morale's low, when trust is difficult, if not non-existent, it's almost always an authenticity issue. People don't feel safe to be real themselves. There's not a lot of open, honest dialogue that's helpful and healthy. Every now and again there's an environment where people, yeah, everyone can be honest, but it's pretty nasty, right? They're missing that lack of righteousness piece. But more often than not, in most organizations, regardless of the industry, one of the biggest challenges is people aren't honest and straightforward and authentic. And specifically what I've heard is I've worked with a lot of facilities groups over the years and talked to people who work in your industry, is one of the biggest challenges that you guys have culturally is the culture of the people who work in facilities is often way different than the culture of the organization itself, right? I mean, that's true in a lot of different companies, but in some companies it's quite extreme. In fact, I was speaking to a facilities group down at Google, which is not far from where I live here in the San Francisco Bay Area, a couple years ago, and I do a lot of work with Google, so I know a lot about their culture. But as I was talking to this particular group, one of the biggest challenges they talked about having was just being able to, how do we communicate effectively given that our world and what we do and what we focus on is so different. And even within the facilities organization, the folks that are in maintenance and doing the on-the-ground, getting their hands dirty work versus some of the people who are on the real estate side or on the planning side or on the, that can vary. But specifically, I remember talking to these guys down at Google, and they were like, look, it's like we're speaking different languages. And then where the conversation went was I said, look, it's that much more important for you to be yourself, for you to be authentic. Because if you feel as though, well, we're so different, the commonalities between human beings, that has to do with that vulnerability. So just thinking about the importance of it. Okay. So we know what it is, we're talking about what it is. Why it's important is it's, again, that key driver in those relationships. Here's what we want to take a look at now, is what makes it difficult? What makes being authentic difficult or challenging? So again, think about yourself. Think about the environment in which you work, the people that you're around, both internally, within your facilities group, within your direct team, your peers. Maybe, again, if you manage people, the people you lead, maybe who you report to. Think about the larger sort of facilities group as that extends out. Think about some of your, internal clients, some cross-functional partners, if you will. What makes it difficult or challenging when you're at work to be authentic? Right, one of the ways I always like to describe this when I talk about authenticity, you see this picture on the slide, right? It's what's below the waterline. That's an iceberg, right? So as the cliche goes, just the tip of the iceberg, so to speak, pops up above the surface. Right? The rest of that iceberg is down below that waterline. Look at how big that, isn't that a beautiful picture, by the way? But look at how big, that big old iceberg, right? Go back to look at that big iceberg above the surface. If you saw that on the horizon, you'd think, man, that's a huge iceberg. But if you look down below the water, you realize, oh my goodness, only like 10% of that thing maybe more than that, but let's just say 10% for the sake of it is popped up above the surface. The majority of the iceberg is down below the waterline. We can't see it when we just look at it on the surface, but there it is, enormous. That's kind of how you and I are as human beings. We walk around in life with just the tip of our iceberg popped up above the surface. right? That's our identity. That's what we want people to see. That's the good part of us. That's the professional, polished, I've got things together. But then there's all of that, who we really are. So what's below the waterline? What's down there? It's the stuff we don't necessarily express or expose. It's the stuff we don't want people to know about us, right? So what's down there? Think about it for yourself. Think about it for the people around you. I mean, when I have this conversation with folks, usually, well, what's down there? Fear, insecurity, doubt, judgment, right? Mistakes, failures, vulnerability, as we were talking about, things, gosh, I don't know. You know, you ever find yourself in a meeting and you realize, I don't really know what they're talking about, or I don't know the answer to this, or, right? And there's stuff down there, stuff that, well, I can't say that. If I said that, I might get fired, or, you know, whatever. I mean, look, so there is some stuff down there, stuff that, you know, it's just stuff we deem inappropriate, but it's not all bad stuff that's down below the waterline. There's a lot of ideas. There's suggestions. There's solutions. There's, right? I mean, there's a lot of stuff down there. There's, how many times you've ever been in a meeting or been in a situation and you thought to yourself, I have an idea about this. I have a suggestion about this. Again, based on our personality, some of us are more comfortable speaking up than others, but what's interesting is that a lot of times we don't. Oh, well, you know, that's not really my job, or my boss is in the room or in this meeting, or I don't want to step on anyone's toes, or I have no idea, this thing might be a dumb idea. And last time I took a risk, it didn't work out. Whatever, it's just, so there's a lot of good stuff down there. So how you expand your capacity personally for more authenticity is you start to lower the waterline. And how you ultimately have that happen for your team and the people around you is you make it safe for them to lower their waterline. I'll give you an example of this. I mean, I have many examples. But I gave a presentation at an event for one of my clients. This was probably, gosh, about maybe 2.5 years ago. It's a pretty big company, and I spoke at this particular event. I was talking about authenticity, I was talking about teamwork, and I was talking about leadership in certain ways. And I spoke at this conference internally, and a guy comes up to me afterwards, and he says, wow, you know, thanks, Mike, I really got a lot out of your presentation. He said, I really wish that my team were here. I'm the only one from my team who came to this event. He said, but we could really use some help right now. And he said, look, I don't know if my manager, my boss would be into it. You know, he's a bit old school, but I wonder if maybe, I'll talk to him about it. And, you know, do you do any work with smaller teams in addition to, you know, speaking at big events like this? And I said, yeah, I do some of that. It depends on the situation and if it's a good fit. But he said, well, let me talk to my manager, and then, you know, if he's interested, maybe we'll give you a call, or he'll give you a call, and we'll see. So anyway, a few days later, I get a call from the boss, the manager of this guy, and he said, listen, I heard about your presentation, and it sounds like there may be some stuff relevant to our team. He said, so we talked for a little bit, and basically, you know, he told me, look, the team doesn't really trust each other. He said the truth is the people on my team are really smart and talented. They don't have a lot of maturity and courage to deal with things directly with each other. He said, so they run a lot of issues through me, and I keep trying to tell them, talk to each other. But even though, you know, it's a relatively small team, there's only 8 people on the team, it's like we just got a lot of little, there's divisions, and there's people don't like each other, and people don't trust each other, and I keep getting frustrated with them, and I don't really, you know, I don't know how to get these guys to talk to each other. So anyway, he said, look, I don't know how much they'll be willing to open up and talk about this stuff, but why don't we set up a time you come, and you can come in and do a session with our team? So we did that. We set it up for a few weeks later. And I walked into the conference room that day that I was scheduled to meet with that team, and they were all already there. I walked in the room. Have you ever walked into a room where, like, there was such a bad vibe, you could feel it right away? I mean, that was how it was. I was like, oh, man. Gosh, like I knew they had some issues, but these people really don't like each other, or something's up. You know, it was sort of like, it was a pretty obvious elephant in the room, so to speak. Anyway, you know, I started to talk, and with a smaller group, you know, I'm trying to engage in more of a discussion. It's less of a speech, if you will, but they weren't really all that communicative. They weren't saying much. So I'm kind of talking, and, you know, 15, 20 minutes into my talk, I mean, they seemed relatively interested, even though they weren't saying much, but that bad vibe was still there. And I couldn't quite figure out what it was or what to do. And I said to them, look, I said, I can keep talking. I got plenty of stuff to share with you guys about this stuff and about teamwork and about authenticity and trust and, you know. I said, but I think that what would be most beneficial is if we actually talked about what's going on for you guys as a team. And I actually, you know, I didn't have a PowerPoint, so I didn't have this beautiful picture of an iceberg. I just actually went up to the whiteboard and I drew a picture, not quite to scale, of an iceberg on the board, and I said, hey, you know, just the tip of the iceberg pops up above the surface. I said, but who we really are and how we really feel and what's really going on is down below the waterline. So I said, what we got to do if we're going to build more trust with each other is lower the waterline. I said, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to do an exercise. It'll, you know, go around the table one at a time. I'll start. And we're just going to repeat this phrase. When it's your turn, you'll have about 2 minutes, and just repeat this phrase. If you really knew me, you'd know this about me. I said, now look, you guys all know each other, so that might sound kind of silly to say, but just say it anyway. And I'm not actually asking you to tell us your whole life story and where you came from, and you know, but if we really knew you in this moment right now, how are you feeling? What are you thinking? What's going on below the waterline for you right now, if we really knew? And I said, you don't have to say anything you don't want to say, but I invite you to take a risk and open up. And I said, I'll start. So I said, if you really knew me, you would know that I feel an enormous amount of tension in this room. I said, I felt it the moment I walked in the door. I mean, it was like visceral. It hit me like a wave. And even now, 20 minutes into our time together, I still feel it. It's like I have like a knot in my stomach. It's like palpable. I said, if you really, really knew me, you would know that I feel pretty nervous to introduce this exercise to you guys because, on the one hand, I'm afraid, I mean, that you won't open up. I mean, you don't even really know me. You don't have any particular reason to trust me. And it feels like, just from my sense, that it may not feel all that safe or comfortable for you guys to open up with each other. So my fear is that we'll go around the room here and you won't open up, and this will be uncomfortable, awkward, and a waste of time. I said, but if you really, really, really knew me, I think I might be more afraid that you will actually open up. And I don't know what's going to come out. It might get messy. I may not be able to help, or we may not have enough time, and I don't want to make things worse. So I then turned to the first person on my right around the table, who happened to be the boss, the manager. And I knew from just talking to him on the phone and the little sense I had about him that what I was asking him to do was probably quite out of his comfort zone. And I assumed for the group as well, but he shot me this look like, this isn't what we talked about on the phone, right? Because it wasn't. I mean, I hadn't planned actually to do this particular exercise with them, not this way, but it just felt like that's what was needed in the moment. So he started, and you could tell he was really uncomfortable. His face was turning red, and he's shooting me looks like, I don't want to do this, and you know, really, and the first minute or so as he was going through, it got even more awkward and uncomfortable in that room. And then he said, look, you guys know I'm a pretty private guy. I don't like talking about stuff like this and personal stuff. Where I don't, you know, it just isn't me. So doing this exercise is uncomfortable. He said, but if you really, really knew me, you would know that my wife and I have been going through some difficult stuff at home with each other and with our boys, and we've just been having a tough time. So things on the home front aren't really good right now. And as difficult and challenging as that's been, coming to work has been even worse because we're not getting along. And we're struggling as a team. And it's not that we're not good at our jobs. You guys are good. We just can't seem to communicate and get along and trust each other. And you know, he said, you know, I get frustrated with you guys a lot when you come talk to me and I say, go talk to him and don't talk to, you know. He said, but the truth is I go home most nights and I feel like I'm failing as a leader because all my years of managing and leading people, I've never had this much trouble with the team. And quite frankly, I don't really know what to do. And, there was such honesty and transparency and vulnerability in what he said that it was like, whoa, the vibe in the room changed. And we went around the table, and one by one, people really opened up. And they really started to share about how they were feeling and what they were thinking and what was going on, and some of their frustration and some of the pressure they felt and some personal stuff that was whatever. It just was real. It's often less even about what people say. It's just the quality of it, the feeling of it. And we got all the way around the table, and, I looked at them and I said, first of all, I acknowledge you guys for the courage to open up like that. And then I said to them, listen, I think the best thing we can do right now is just talk about you guys as a team from this place where we are, from down below the waterline. What do you really need to talk about as a team with each other so that you can trust each other, so that you can partner with each other, so that you can actually be a team? And we proceeded to have that conversation over the next, I don't know, hour and a half or 2 hours, however much time we had left. And it was remarkable. It wasn't like they fixed every issue they had and solved every problem, not even close. They didn't go from being a dysfunctional, non-trusting, non-communicative team to a high-performing, rock star championship team in the course of a couple hours. It's not magic, but what they did was they were able to address some difficult issues with each other. And not only was it valuable to address some of those issues, and they did resolve some stuff, more importantly, they opened the door and they taught each other in that experience that they could be real, they could be open, they could be vulnerable with each other, and that nobody would die and nobody would get majorly upset and it wouldn't be this horrible thing. In fact, there was a lot of value and benefit to it. And I stayed in touch with that team over the next series of months, and they did some good work, and they really worked some things out and set up some different structures for their team for how they could operate more effectively. But more importantly, they were able to repair some of the relationships and rebuild some trust that had been lost. And I see that a lot with teams that I work with. Again, it's not some magic formula, but what happens is when we start to get real, all of a sudden, things can change. But it takes courage. And for any of you listening to this as we're here live or listening to the recording of this webinar, especially if you're in a leadership role, but even if you're not, how you influence other people, first and foremost, is a lot less about what you say. It's about how you show up. It's about modeling it, right? It really is, as Gandhi taught us, be the change. You start being more authentic, people around you, they're not always going to respond exactly in kind, but they're much more likely to. All right, so let's talk a little bit about some principles of authenticity. These are the 5 principles of authenticity that I teach in my book, Be Yourself, Everyone Else Has Already Taken. Now, they're pretty simple and straightforward on the surface, at least conceptually. But as we look at each one of them, I'm going to talk about them briefly, and then we're going to talk a little bit about some actions, and then we'll get into some Q&A. And before I dive into this, though, Joshua, I just want to check in and see, are there any questions or any comments that have come up that anybody's typed in that I should address at this point before we move on?
No questions, just a request that you speak a little louder.
Oh, okay. Thanks. All right, I'll try to talk. Being too loud is never usually an issue, or being too soft, I should say. Anyway, thanks for letting me know. All right, hopefully you can hear me a little bit better. So the first, and if you do have questions you want to pipe in now, feel free to do that. Josh will interrupt me.
Someone just typed one in, actually. This is
okay,
how do you
great.
communicate something passionately without coming across as righteous?
That's a great question. So how do you communicate something passionately without coming across as righteous? So the deeper thing to look at there is it's less about whether you come across righteous or not. It's actually, are you being righteous or not? So this is where emotional intelligence comes in. So passion is beautiful. Passion's wonderful. We confuse sometimes passion and righteousness. So again, if I'm passionate about something, I want it, I'm fired up, I think it's the right thing, I think it means something, but am I righteous, like attached, like it has to be my way, like anyone who disagrees with me is wrong, is bad, I'm going to fight them to the death? I know I'm being a little extreme, but you know what I mean? So one of the distinctions to think about is commitment versus attachment. When we're committed to something, we're passionate about it. We want it. We think it makes sense for us. We really, this means something to me. I believe in this. I want this. When we're committed to it, there's a passionate energy. There's a level of non-attachment. If it doesn't happen, it's not like it's going to ruin our life. So it's perspective, right? When we're attached to something, it better happen or someone's going to hear about it. You know what I mean? So again, that's where it goes back to that checking in with ourselves. So you want to start paying attention to yourself. What's the difference for me when I'm passionate with righteousness or passionate without righteousness? And if you're genuinely being authentically passionate without righteousness, you probably won't come across as righteous. If you're being righteous, even, by the way, if you're being really nice about it, some of us have used nice, flowery, we've learned to use nice, flowery words that sound good, but really what's underneath it is a level of righteousness, like, actually, I'm right, and everyone else who doesn't agree with me is an idiot. You know, I mean, that kind of thing. So it's paying more attention to where's it coming from. It's a great question, though. And that's why, look, this actually feeds right into, on the 5 principles of authenticity, which are up on the slide, the first one of knowing yourself, it's an ongoing, lifelong process. There's no destination. There's no place you get to called, I know myself completely. There's no way we're ever going to know ourselves completely. We are way too complicated and complex as human beings. And we're emotional creatures, and we ebb and flow, and we change and evolve all the time. So we've got to pay attention to ourselves. Like for me with righteousness, as an example, I've got to be mindful because I can go to a righteous place really easily. And I'll notice certain body sensations. My heart will start to race. I'll start to talk faster. I'll start to interrupt you if I'm getting to that righteous place. And so if I can notice myself doing that, I can take a breath. I can step back. I can even sometimes acknowledge and say, you know what, I'm sorry. I was starting to get righteous because that one's a really hot button issue for me. Like I got really strong opinions about that. And I have a hard time sometimes listening to people when they don't have the same opinion that I do, right? And even just in the acknowledgement of that, we can get back into a more authentic conversation, if you will. But so knowing ourselves is about a constant commitment to learning, to growth, to introspection in a healthy way. Being on this webinar is a way to know yourself. It's to learn, it's to grow, it's to evolve, right? So that's the first principle. The second principle has to do with transforming our fear. Now, what does that mean? Never get scared? No, that's not realistic. That's not life. One of the most basic human emotions we have as human beings is fear. Fear in and of itself isn't a problem. It's an emotion. It's not a problem. But we have decided that fear is bad, that we shouldn't get scared, that we're weak if we get scared. That's insane. It's just insane. It's like, don't get hungry. It's just part of what happens, right? I mean, if you're walking down the street and I jump out at you, you're going to get scared. It's like, it's a reflex. It's a nervous system response at that level. And the problem with fear isn't usually the fear, it's the denial or the avoidance of fear. Most of our negative techniques in life, particularly in relationships, are driven by us avoiding or denying our fear. And when we get to a place where we feel more comfortable with fear, that it's okay to get scared, that I'm not a bad person, I'm not weak, I'm not wrong, I'm not inferior, there's nothing wrong with me. I just, oh wow, I'm noticing I have fear in this moment. Acknowledge the fear. Recognize it, acknowledge it, allow it to be felt and expressed and move through it. Look, an example of this, now I deal with this one all the time because of what I do. I speak in front of large groups of people for a living. Now, even though I do this and I love this and I'm passionate about it, I still get nervous. I mean, look, public speaking is the thing that scares most people more than anything. They did a survey a few years ago, it was probably about a decade or so ago in USA Today, and they asked people, what's your greatest fear in life? Do you know number 1 was public speaking? Number 5 was death. I think 3, 4, and 5 were like the dark or spiders or heights or something. But anyway, literally number 1 was public speaking. So and people will often ask me, wow, you seem so comfortable. Like, how do you not get nervous? And I say, well, I still do. I just don't really care that I do. And I don't mean that like I'm somehow made of steel and no, I mean I don't give it too much attention. I know I'll be okay. I know I'll survive. I know the fear isn't going to overtake me. So I allow my heart to race. I allow my face to get flush. I allow all the body sensations of fear to happen. And I breathe and try to utilize it in a positive way. Look, part of my background, I haven't really gone much into this, but I played baseball for many years. I played In high school, I actually got drafted by the Yankees out of high school. Didn't sign with the Yankees because I got a scholarship to play baseball at Stanford. Went to Stanford, played there, and then got drafted by the Kansas City Royals. I ended up hurting my arm when I was in the minor leagues with Kansas City, so I never got to the big leagues, but I played 3 years of professional baseball. But all those years of playing baseball, and now some of my clients, I think Joshua mentioned this, I work with the San Francisco Giants, and I also work with the Atlanta Braves and the NBA and the Vancouver Canucks. And look, pro athletes get scared all the time. I mean, one of the things I talk to when I talk to pro athletes, or talk about when I'm talking to them, is it's okay to get scared. And you know what's hilarious is, like, most of these folks, they don't hear that. They'll come up to me after and they're like, hey man, thanks, you know. I get really nervous sometimes before the game, and I always thought I was weird or something was wrong with me. I'm like, nope, you're just human. You know, and if you think about sports, if you're a sports fan, look, the difference between a really successful athlete and a successful team is how do they manage and deal with their fear. So that's a big piece. It's transforming it and utilizing it. And that's a piece of vulnerability. That's a place we can connect with each other, actually. Third thing is express yourself. So are we willing to express ourselves? Again, authentically, vulnerably, without righteousness, not let me just dump all my judgmental opinions on you. But can I lower my waterline and actually express myself? And it's not about being articulate. Look, some of us are more articulate and well-spoken than others. That's not what this is about. Again, it's more emotional than it is practical. Look, EQ, emotional intelligence, the research has shown us now over the last 20 years that the effectiveness of a leader, the effectiveness of someone in business, regardless of the job that you do, your emotional intelligence, your EQ, is twice as important as your IQ, how smart you are. Or it's not even how smart you are, even how technically savvy you are, how good you are at your job. Your ability to manage your own emotions, know yourself, and connect with other people is twice as important as your ability to get things done. Fourth principle is be bold. That means take risks. So that really relates to the second principle, transform your fear. You can't be bold without dealing with fear. Boldness is about risk-taking. Boldness is about vulnerability. Boldness is about creativity. Boldness is about doing something new and different, challenging yourself, pushing yourself up to the limit, to the edge. Think of it like a cliff. The way you grow in life, you don't jump off the cliff. You die if you did that. So it's not about being crazy, but you stick your foot out over the edge of the cliff, just enough that you feel the fear. Oh my gosh, this is uncomfortable, this is new, this is different, and you hang out on the edge long enough that metaphorically the cliff grows. And now you're on solid ground again. Okay, and then you need a little more. And sometimes maybe you need to take a step back, and sometimes you step too far and you almost fall, but you know, that's how growth happens. It's incremental for most of us individually, and that's how you also support other people in growing. Challenge them to push to the edge, past their comfort zone, past their limit. Right? There's a great bumper sticker. I've seen it lots of places, T-shirt, you know, life begins at the end of your comfort zone. That's what being bold is about. And number 5 is a really important one. Celebrate who you are. Look, a core theme in all my books, the book I just wrote that'll be out in a few months, Nothing Changes Until You Do, that's actually about making peace with ourselves. Our relationship with ourselves has everything to do with our relationship with everyone else. And one of the reasons that we're often critical or negative towards other people is because we're critical and negative towards ourselves. One of the reasons that we're inauthentic with other people is we're inauthentic with ourselves. We're not kind to ourselves. We're hard on ourselves in a unhealthy way. Celebrating who we are is about accepting and appreciating all of who we are, even our weaknesses, even the things that we don't particularly like. One of the best ways to improve some of the things that we think need improvement isn't by being harsh with ourselves, it's actually by being gentle and kind with ourselves. That's how we can empower ourselves to grow and change in a positive way. All right, so a few things about action, and then we'll open it up for any other questions that people might have. So a couple things that you can do just to practice authenticity in your relationships in a very practical way. So give your undivided attention to people when you're talking to them. Don't multitask. Look, this is such a basic thing, but this is like profound, especially these days. We're so distracted by our phones, by our computers, by other things, by you name it. We don't listen to each other. Look, I'm not going to have an authentic conversation with you and let you know what's really going on for me if I don't have your full attention. So authenticity starts in our relationships oftentimes with our presence, our awareness, our ability to listen and connect. Sometimes that means we got to tell people, listen, I can't talk right now, or I can't give you my full attention right now, I'm distracted. That's actually respectful, and people appreciate it. 99 times out of 100, the conversation does not have to happen right in that moment. Another thing you can do is admit when you don't know something, or you need some help, or you make a mistake. Look, these are simple things, but not easy. If you don't know something, the worst thing you can do is pretend like you know it. It creates stress for you, and sometimes it's fine, it's benign, but a lot of times it'll come back and bite you in the you-know-what, because that person assumes you actually know what they're talking about. And this happens all the time. We're in a meeting, we're in a conversation, someone says something, it's like, I don't know what that means. But we don't say anything. Now we're distracted. If you need help, ask for help. You make a mistake. Best thing to do when you make a mistake, own it as soon as possible. You know, oops, I screwed up. I'm really sorry. Make it right. Don't assume or hope that no one will notice. Right? This third one relates to the second one a little bit, at least a piece of it. Ask for support from others in a genuine way. Most people I know love helping other people. Very few are comfortable asking for help. But this is a huge thing. If you get more comfortable asking for help, two things will happen. You'll get more help, and you'll make it safer and more conducive on your team and in your environment for people to help each other. And the last one here on the slide is to address conflicts or, you know, difficult conversations, if you will, challenging conversations. Deal with them directly. Sooner is always better than later with difficulty. I mean, unless it's just something, you know, you want to sometimes sleep on it or wait a minute or not, you know, dive right in the moment. So count to 10, take a breath, all those things that we've learned. But I mean, when there's an issue or a conflict that arises or a problem, the more time we wait, usually the worse it gets. So it's always better to deal with those things directly and talk to people about, even proactively, hey, if we're going to have a difficult conversation, what's the best way to do that? Or, you know, you got to learn about yourself and other people, and sometimes the best way to do that is just to ask. So, Joshua, are there any specific questions that people have typed in, or now, you know, we'll just open it up the last few minutes we have here. If there are any specific questions, I can take some.
Give them just a minute to see, because sometimes it can take a minute for them to get questions in. So go ahead and put those in. While we're waiting to see if anything comes in, I just want to remind people after the webinar, an email will be sent out for you to give your input on the presentation, and the CFC would really appreciate it if you could answer that, because it just helps them know if you're enjoying what they do for your monthly webinars, etc. And Mike, so it's going well. I don't see anything coming in yet. Someone did ask if they can get a copy of the PowerPoint. Can we
That's totally fine. I mean, I think I've already emailed it to you, Joshua, so feel free to share that. You know, also as you guys are all noticing as you're looking at the slides, you know, my website, mike-robbins.com, is listed on the bottom of most of the slides. The website has lots of free resources. My blog has lots of you know, blog posts, and audio podcasts are connected to them, as well as we're now doing some video blogs. All that stuff is up on the site, and it's free, so feel free to check out the website and utilize any of those resources. You can also get in touch with me if you have questions for me or want to talk to me about anything we talked about in the webinar here, or, you know, about me coming to speak at your organization or anything, you name it. There's also my Twitter handle, @MikeDRobbins. If you're on Twitter, you can follow me there, because I tweet out different stuff and ideas and thoughts and links and different things. So those are some good resources for you.
Okay. I don't see any questions. So again, I thank you, Mike. It was a great presentation. Thank you for kicking off 2014 for us.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for having me, and Happy New Year, and good luck to everybody. I wish you all the best. And again, feel free to stay in touch with me at mike-robbins.com.